Amtrak is the best way to experience seeing the USA. With routes all across the country, Amtrak has a wide variety of different services, from fast corridor trains that people used to commute on, to long-distance, multi-day trains that cross through some of America's most beautiful landscapes. There's quite a variety of service in just the long-distance routes alone, so let's compare them with the best way I know how to, the tier list. But what is a long-distance Amtrak route? I'm gonna make this quick, but Amtrak has 3 different classifications for the different types of services that they operate. Long-distance routes, the Northeast Corridor, and state-supported routes. The state-supported routes are classified under 750 miles in length, and that get their funding mainly through state governments. These usually run more frequently, with some examples of these routes being the Capital Corridor, the Lincoln, and the Empire Service. The Northeast Corridor runs between Washington, D.C. and Boston, Massachusetts. It's Amtrak's fastest and most frequent service, but that justifies a whole video of its own. Now, Amtrak long-distance routes generally are categorized as routes over 750 miles that are operated by Amtrak, mainly on trackage leased from freight railroads. Now, like pretty much every other tier list ever made, this is going to be quite subjective. However, I have taken a majority of these routes, and I've traveled well over 10,000 miles on Amtrak long-distance trains in the past 3 years. And at the end of the day, every single one of these routes are worth taking. But if you have any feedback, do let me know down in the comments respectfully. I also do have some factors that I'm setting as very important for the rating of these routes. First, we have destinations, because why take the route if it doesn't go anywhere? Next, we have views. Good chance you're taking the train over the bus, plane, or driving is to actually enjoy the views that you're seeing along the way. I'm also factoring in on-time percentage, which Amtrak rates anything within 15 minutes of a schedule as on time for long distance. So if you're late constantly, then good chance that the route is always late. I also factored in the consist, or what type of train cars the locomotives are hauling, and speed of the route. Okay, I'm done with the yap session. Let's get into the list. Alright, I know I'm throwing all 3 of these services together. They are technically different services with some minor differences, such as the Silver Star making a diversion to service Tampa, and the Palmetto running from Savannah to New York City instead of going all the way into Florida, but at the end of the day, they're all very similar to each other, and I'm going to give them the same grading here. The Silver services, as they're sometimes called, run along the eastern seaboard of the United States, all starting in New York City and ending either in Savannah or Miami, Florida. This service mostly exists for the functional reasons, as much of the route is ran at nighttime, with the views of the route being mostly unimpressive. The consists of these trains mostly utilize the East Coast single-level Amfleets for coach cars, which are a fairly solid option, and the Viewliners for the sleepers, which are slightly better than the other option. However, the lack of an actual lounge car and just using the Amfleet Cafe car is a real bummer on any long-distance train. One huge benefit of the Silver Star and Meteor is that their dining cars have the traditional dining service on board, with Amtrak slowly bringing this back over their microwave meals that they had briefly switched to in the 2010s. With finer dining options on board, with fresh food, it actually adds to the quality of the Silver service. On top of this, the route does have a lot of destinations along it, including Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, Raleigh, Richmond, and all of the major cities that are between Washington, D.C. and New York City on the Northeast Corridor. The Silver service also does have a fairly middle-of-the-pack on-time percentage when it comes to Amtrak long-distance routes. So if you're trying to get up and down the East Coast and you don't mind the lack of a sightseer lounge, then you might really enjoy this route. Overall, its functionality can't be understated in terms of getting places, and for that, I'm gonna put it into the B tier. The Crescent is a route that cuts right through the heart of the South, with service between New York City and New Orleans. It has a couple of destinations on the route like Birmingham, Atlanta, and Tuscaloosa, as well as the major cities on the Northeast Corridor between New York City and DC. However, outside of that, it really doesn't have the same amount of destinations like you might see on the Silver service or some of the other services around the country. On top of this, the views really aren't that stunning for an Amtrak long-distance train either. Unless you like the forests and farmland of the South, there's not really much to see. It's got a fairly decent on-time percentage though, and it utilizes the exact same rolling stock that you'll see the Silver service and other East Coast routes utilize with Amfleets and Viewliners. While the Crescent does serve many underserved communities within the Southeast, the Crescent is kind of lackluster even compared to other Amtrak routes on the East Coast. For that, it's going into the D tier. The Capital Limited is one of 3 East Coast routes that utilizes the other set of rolling stock that Amtrak mainly uses for its West Coast trains. The Superliners are bi-level train cars that, in my opinion, are slightly better for coach class due to comfier seating, more distance from you in the bathrooms, and bigger windows for better views. However, Amtrak has a severe shortage of these Superliners, and the Capital Limited has been dealing with shorter consists due to a lack of them, including a lack of sightseer lounges on board. This route does have quite a few useful destinations on it, as it runs from Chicago to DC with stops in South Bend, Indiana, Toledo, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. The route does have a fairly solid on-time percentage by Amtrak standards, but with its consist issues and views that mostly go unseen due to its main runtime being at night, the Capital Limited is going into the C tier. The Cardinal easily has some of the best scenery for an East Coast Amtrak route, and yet one of the weirdest consists for any of the Amtrak routes. While the route from Chicago to New York City doesn't sound that weird, it's actually the alternate, slower, and less frequent route, with it also being one of 2 lines in the Amtrak network to only run 3 times a week. The line goes south from Chicago, stopping in destinations like Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, Charlottesville, West Virginia, and all of the Northeast regional cities from DC to New York City. The reason why this route's consist is so weird is because the train is often used to shuttle other Amtrak cars and engines to Amtrak's main workshops down in Beech Grove, Indiana. The passenger experience, though, is pretty similar to other East Coast routes, with Amfleets and Viewliners. Do be aware that Amtrak does like to use older equipment for this route. The views through Appalachia are incredible. It's too bad that the windows are this small, and with a very average on-time percentage, the Cardinal is gonna go into the C tier. The Lakeshore Limited is probably the most average route that Amtrak operates. With service from Chicago to New York City, it stops in destinations like Toledo, Cleveland, Erie, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Albany. With it being a pretty standard overnight service, it still manages to serve plenty of destinations along its route. It also has really incredible views through the Hudson River Valley. The Lakeshore Limited operates with a standard Amfleet and Viewliner consist for East Coast long-distance trains. It also has a fairly decent on-time percentage despite its infamous nickname as the Lakeshore Limited. This route is actually fairly solid with alright views, good destinations, and a standard consist, B tier. The City of New Orleans is the westernmost eastern U.S. route, with service on the route beginning in New Orleans and ending in Chicago. While lacking in views, it does have a couple of destinations, such as Jackson and Memphis. While it's very similar to the Crescent, it utilizes superliners along the route with access to a sightseer lounge. While the views aren't super incredible, the vibes of the sightseer lounge are just unbeaten, and any route that has a sightseer lounge is a massive improvement to its score. As well as having the highest on-time percentage out of any long-distance route, the City of New Orleans has some major advantages over the rest of the East Coast long-distance routes. While it doesn't have the traditional dining that most of the next routes have, it's still a great route, and it's going to go into the B tier. But you know what would go into the S tier if it were an Amtrak route? My Patreon. Because for just $1 a month, you can get early access to videos, extra videos, your name in the credits, and more. The link is down below if you want to help support the channel, but anyways, let's get back into the video. Formerly Amtrak's longest route, the Sunset Limited is the only other Amtrak service besides the Cardinal that only runs 3 days a week. But with service from New Orleans to Los Angeles, it stops at many important locations, including Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, Tucson, and Phoenix, kinda. The Sunset Limited, like every other West Coast route, utilizes superliners for the service. While it does have some really beautiful moments on the trip, such as the Pecos High Bridge, the views aren't as great as some of the other lines on this list. Now, probably the biggest issue I have with the Sunset Limited has to be the on-time percentage of this route. Now, while Amtrak routes aren't really well known for having good on-time percentages, this is probably the one where you're going to see the worst and the highest amount of delays. Despite this, it's still a very solid Western US route with perks like a sightseer lounge and traditional dining, and for that, it's gonna go into the C tier. The The Texas Eagle has some very interesting operations for a western US route. While most days the Texas Eagle runs normally from Chicago to San Antonio, Texas, for 3 days out of the week, the Texas Eagle meets with the Sunset Limited in San Antonio and continues on to Los Angeles from there. This run from Chicago to Los Angeles on the Texas Eagle is technically the longest route in the Amtrak network, running over 2,700 miles and taking 65 hours to do the trip, with destinations along its individual route including cities like St. Louis, Little Rock, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin. The Texas Eagle has plenty of destinations on its own section. While most of the route doesn't have incredible views until it runs west of San Antonio, the Texas Eagle does have a fairly solid on-time percentage for a long-distance train. However, the biggest issue without a doubt is its rolling stock. Much like how the Capital Limited has had superliners pulled from it for other operations, the Texas Eagle has also had the same issue, leading to smaller consists and even ones that lack a sightseer lounge. Overall, while the Texas Eagle serves some important destinations and has some solid views on the western half of the route, as well as being Amtrak's longest route, the Texas Eagle, due to its poor consists as of recent, the lack of good views for most of the route, and its limited service past San Antonio, gets it put in the D tier. This is without a doubt Amtrak's strangest route. The auto train was originally its own private railroad, opened the same year that Amtrak was formed, in 1971. But after a decade of service, the auto train faced some financial uncertainty and joined as part of the Amtrak network. The train runs from Lorton, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., and runs to Sanford, Florida, just north of Orlando. The reason for this is that this is Amtrak's only route where you can actually bring your car with you. That's right, this train carries auto racks that allows you to bring your car on board as an alternative to driving it all the way up or down I-95. This also means that it is Amtrak's longest consist, usually being over double the length of a typical Amtrak train's consist. The auto train utilizes superliners with a lounge and offers traditional dining on board as well. The views, though, aren't anything special as it shares its route with the Silver services. And with the line having a fairly decent on-time percentage, the auto train is going to fall into the B tier. I have a slight bias towards the West Coast long-distance trains, but the Empire Builder without a doubt is in my top 3 for favorite Amtrak services of any kind. With some of the best scenery in the western half of the route, it has some of the best views of Glacier National Park and the Pacific Northwest in general. The Empire Builder runs from Chicago to Spokane, where the train then splits into 2 separate services going both to Seattle and Portland. The Empire Builder, like all other western US routes, utilizes superliners with sightseer lounges, and they do a wonderful job to show off the towering mountains and beautiful river canyons that you see on the Empire Builder. However, the Builder isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's quite a lack of destinations outside of Spokane, Glacier National Park, Minnesota St. Paul, and Milwaukee. While that may sound like a lot of destinations, this is in fact a much longer route than anything you'll see on the East Coast. One piece of advice for anybody taking the Empire Builder is that if you're in a sleeper car, then take the route to Seattle, since it contains the dining car all the way to the end. And if you're in coach, then take it to Portland, since you'll have the full sightseer and cafe car the whole way. But despite the downside like some plain views in the middle and poor on-time percentage, the Empire Builder is still one of Amtrak's best routes that you can take. A tier. This was the first Amtrak route that I ever took from end to end, and the only route I've ever taken in a sleeper. The California Zephyr is often argued as the best Amtrak route out there, and for good reason. With service from Chicago to Emeryville, California in the Bay Area, this route is loaded with destinations in between like Omaha, Denver, Grand Junction, Salt Lake City, Reno, and Sacramento. On top of this, this route has some of the most incredible views in the Amtrak network, or on any train anywhere in the world, such as climbing the Rockies, going through the Colorado River Canyon, and climbing the Sierra Nevadas. This route, utilizing the Superliner consist, takes full advantage of these views with the Sightseer Lounge, and other than going through Iowa, there's never a dull moment on the Zephyr. My biggest critique of the route has to be its on-time percentage, with it constantly being in a battle for the worst overall on-time percentage with the Sunset Limited. Overall though, the California Zephyr is considered the quintessential Amtrak route, and there's good reason for it. S tier. I'm gonna let my bias shine through here. This is without a doubt the best route in the Amtrak network. With service running from Los Angeles to Seattle, Washington, the Coast Starlight has it all. From the variety of the beautiful scenery, like when you start your journey off running directly along the Pacific Ocean, to the incredible views of Cascadia when you pass along Mount Shasta. There's no dull moment for views on board the Coast Starlight. Along with this, the Coast Starlight has a vast variety of destinations to choose from as well, such as Portland, Eugene, Sacramento, the Bay Area, and other coastal cities like Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. With the West Coast consists of the Superliners and Sightseer Lounge enhancing the enjoyment of this route, and a solid on-time percentage, the Coast Starlight is the peak of Amtrak train travel by any route. While the Coast Starlight used to be even better with its own dedicated second lounge including a movie theater on board, the Coast Starlight still deserves its ranking in the S tier. While you can get from Chicago to LA on the Texas Eagle, the more direct way of doing so would be taking the Southwest Chief, with stops and destinations along the way like Kansas City, Topeka, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, and San Bernardino. This route essentially runs a similar path to Route 66. While it does have some pretty moments, I wouldn't say it's as good as the Empire Builder or California Zephyr in terms of the western US routes. With the standard Superliner consist, it does help that it has the traditional dining and sightseer lounge, but overall with its poor on-time percentage and views that, while are good, aren't as good as the other West Coast routes, I'm gonna put the Southwest Chief into the C tier. Here's a recap of all the routes' different rankings. Now, this is just the long distance routes, so there's no corridor services or regional services, but how do you feel about the rankings? Is there anything you would change? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I want to thank everybody who helped me make this video, and I especially want to thank all of my generous patrons, including Tony Stunts and John Schukites. Not only do they get to support the channel, but they also get benefits including early access to videos, extra videos, their name in the credits, and more. If you want to join these lovely people and help support the channel, then feel free to check out my Patreon. The link is down below. Also down there you'll find links to my other socials, where I post updates and extra content. Folks, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's been a minute since I made a tier list. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.